I sat at my own dining table in the home I had owned for 35 years, watching my son Derek and his wife Amanda whisper intensely across from me. The house still smelled of the pot roast I had spent all afternoon preparing for our weekly family dinner, just like I had every Sunday for the past 18 months since they moved in. Derek suddenly slammed his fist on the mahogany table, making my grandmother's china rattle dangerously, and screamed at me to give Amanda the master bedroom or pack my bags and get out of my own house. Instead of tears or pleading, I calmly set down my silver fork, looked directly at their shocked faces, and said simply, "I choose my bags." The silence that followed my words stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Amanda's mouth hung open, her carefully applied lipstick suddenly looking garish under the dining room chandelier. Derek's face flushed crimson, a vein pulsing visibly at his temple. I had seen that same expression when he was 12 and caught stealing quarters from my purse. 18 months earlier, Derek had knocked on my front door carrying 2 suitcases and wearing the defeated expression of a man whose world had crumbled. His marketing position at a tech startup had been eliminated during what he called corporate restructuring. Amanda stood beside him, her designer handbag clutched tightly, already scanning my Victorian home in Portland, Oregon, with calculating eyes. As any mother would, I welcomed them with open arms and a warm meal. I had purchased this house with my late husband Robert when Derek was just 5 years old. Every mortgage payment had been a struggle on our modest incomes, but we had persevered. Robert passed 3 years ago, leaving me the house free and clear, along with memories embedded in every carefully chosen piece of furniture and every photograph lining the hallways. To make room for Derek and Amanda, I converted my beloved art studio into a guest bedroom. 30 years of oil paintings, watercolors, and charcoal sketches found themselves banished to the basement, stacked against the concrete walls like forgotten dreams. My easel, which had stood proudly by the north-facing window for decades, disappeared into storage, along with my palette knives and tubes of paint that had cost me weeks of saving to afford. Amanda wasted no time making her presence known. She rearranged my living room furniture without asking, claiming the original layout was feng shui nightmare. She replaced my cherished family photos with abstract prints she had ordered online, telling me my memories made the space feel cluttered and depressing. When I gently protested, Derek defended his wife, suggesting that perhaps I was too set in my ways and needed to embrace change. The complaints began within days of their arrival. Amanda declared the guest room impossibly cramped, despite its generous 12 by 14 dimensions. She criticized my outdated decorating, pointing out that my floral wallpaper was so 1980s and my furniture looked thrift store shabby. Derek nodded along with every criticism, as if he had not grown up surrounded by these same pieces that Robert and I had saved for months to purchase. I picked up extra shifts at the university library where I had worked for 22 years, processing returned books and helping students navigate the reference section. My modest salary had always been sufficient for my simple needs, but now it stretched to cover groceries for 3 adults and utility bills that doubled with Amanda's insistence on keeping the house at exactly 72 degrees year-round. Derek promised repeatedly that their stay would be just temporary, assuring me that he was actively job hunting and would have us back to normal soon. Yet months passed without Derek securing employment. I would find him in the living room at 2 in the afternoon, still in his pajamas, engaged in elaborate video game battles that seemed to require intense concentration and frequent shouting at the television screen. When I suggested he might spend that time updating his resume or networking with former colleagues, he would snap that I didn't understand the modern job market, and that his strategic thinking skills were actually being sharpened by his gaming sessions. Amanda spent her days shopping online and rearranging my belongings. I would return from work to find my kitchen reorganized, my spice rack alphabetized according to her preferences, and my dish towels replaced with expensive ones she had charged to my credit card without asking. When I questioned these purchases, she would explain that she was improving the household efficiency and that I should be grateful for her domestic expertise. Now, as we sat around the dinner table where Derek had just issued his ultimatum, Amanda placed one manicured hand on her stomach and announced with theatrical flair, "I'm pregnant, and this baby deserves the master bedroom for proper development." She claimed that the guest room was far too small for a nursery, and that the morning sunlight streaming through my bedroom windows was essential for healthy fetal growth. Derek immediately supported his wife, his voice rising as he accused me of being selfish and unreasonable for not immediately surrendering my personal space to accommodate their expanding family. Mom, you're being completely ridiculous." Derek continued, his finger pointed accusingly in my direction. "Amanda is carrying your grandchild, and you're worried about keeping some dusty old bedroom to yourself. Don't you want what's best for your family?" I noticed Amanda's pregnancy test positioned conspicuously on the kitchen counter, displayed like a trophy where I could not possibly miss seeing it. The timing felt orchestrated, rehearsed, as if they had planned this confrontation down to the smallest detail. Standing slowly from my chair, I smoothed my navy cardigan and walked to my bedroom. Behind me, I could hear Derek and Amanda whispering urgently, their voices carrying the satisfied tone of people who believed they had won a decisive victory. I pulled my old leather suitcase from the closet shelf, the same one Robert and I had used for our honeymoon to Yellowstone 38 years ago. As I folded my clothes with methodical care, placing each item in the suitcase with the same precision I had used to organize library books for over 2 decades, something caught my attention on the guest room dresser. Amanda's diary lay open, apparently forgotten in her rush to prepare for the dinner confrontation. The pages revealed a carefully documented plan that made my blood run cold. Amanda had been tracking my daily routine, noting when I left for work and when I returned. She had researched elderly rights laws, particularly focusing on establishing residency and contesting property ownership. One entry dated just 3 weeks earlier contained the chilling phrase, "If we can prove the old woman is mentally unstable, we can challenge her ownership and get the house." But the most devastating discovery came in the final entry dated that very morning. Derek's girlfriend Madison stopped by while Gabrielle was at work. "She's further along than I am, due in September. Derek promises he'll choose me once we get the house, but I'm not stupid. Need to secure my position before he throws me away like yesterday's garbage." The diary slipped from my trembling hands as the full scope of their deception crashed over me like an icy wave. Rather than confront Derek and Amanda immediately, I made a decision that would have shocked my younger self. Instead of tears and emotional outbursts, I chose the path of careful investigation. I had learned patience during my decades of cataloging information at the library, and now those same skills would serve me in exposing the truth about my own family. The next morning, after Derek and Amanda left for what they claimed was a doctor's appointment, I began my search in earnest. Derek's laptop sat open on the kitchen table, its screen still glowing from his late-night activities. What I discovered there shattered any remaining illusions about my son's character. Email threads with a real estate attorney named Harrison Walsh revealed months of correspondence about removing an elderly obstacle from property ownership. Derek had been researching elder law, specifically looking for legal precedents that would allow him to challenge my mental competency. One email thread discussed the possibility of having me declared unfit to manage my own affairs with Derek. positioned as my natural guardian and conservator. Hidden in a subfolder labeled Business Plans, I found documents that took my breath away. Derek had been forging my signature on various papers, including a reverse mortgage application for $300,000 against my fully paid home. The loan officer's responses indicated that Derek had already submitted preliminary paperwork claiming to act as my authorized representative due to cognitive decline. Banking statements tucked away in Derek's bedroom dresser revealed unauthorized charges dating back 6 months. He had been using my debit card information to make cash withdrawals, each transaction carefully kept under $500 to avoid triggering bank security alerts. The total amount stolen exceeded $8,000, money I had assumed was being spent on household necessities. But the most disturbing discovery came from reviewing the security camera footage from my home monitoring system. I had installed the cameras 2 years earlier after a series of neighborhood break-ins, but Derek apparently had no knowledge of their existence. The recordings revealed a pattern of systematic invasion of my privacy that left me feeling violated in my own home. Amanda appeared regularly in the footage, methodically searching through my personal papers when she thought I was safely at work. She had photographed my financial statements, insurance policies, and even my will. In one particularly damning video, she could be seen on the phone with someone laughing as she described her progress in documenting the old bat's declining mental state. The audio quality was clear enough to capture her exact words. "She's so pathetic, trusting us completely while we plan her future in the cheapest nursing home we can find. Derek's been feeding her medications that make her drowsy, and she's so naive she thinks she's just getting older. Once we get power of attorney, this house becomes our launching pad for the business Derek wants to start." Audio recordings from the hidden cameras revealed additional layers of deception. Derek had been telling Amanda elaborate lies about my supposed mental decline, describing incidents that had never occurred. He claimed I had been found wandering the neighborhood in confusion, that I had repeatedly forgotten to pay bills, and that I had called him crying about seeing Robert's ghost in our bedroom. While reviewing more recent footage, I discovered the most shocking betrayal of all. Derek had been meeting secretly with Madison, his pregnant girlfriend, who turned out to be married to his former boss. The woman appeared to be several months further along in her pregnancy than Amanda claimed to be, and their intimate conversations revealed a relationship that had been ongoing for over 4 months. Madison was apparently the wife of Charles Rodriguez, the CEO who had laid off Derek. The security footage showed her visiting my house regularly when both Amanda and I were away. In one recorded conversation, Derek promised to leave Amanda as soon as he gained control of my property, using the house as collateral for a business loan to start a consulting company with Charles, who apparently remained unaware of his wife's affair. The real estate attorney emails contained even more damaging information. Derek had been negotiating to use my home as security for a $500,000 business loan, planning to default on the payments and force a foreclosure that would leave me homeless while he and Madison started their new venture in another state. I printed every document, copied every file, and saved every piece of video evidence to multiple flash drives. My years of library training had taught me the importance of thorough documentation, and I approached this investigation with the same methodical precision I had used to organize card catalogs and digital databases. Thomas Brennan, my late husband's best friend and a retired circuit court judge, had remained a close family friend after Robert's death. When I called to ask for his legal advice, his voice immediately filled with concern. Within 2 hours, he was sitting in my living room reviewing the evidence I had collected with the experienced eye of someone who had seen every form of human deception during his 30 years on the bench. "Gabrielle, this is elder financial abuse on a massive scale." Thomas said, his voice grave as he examined the forged documents. The reverse mortgage fraud alone could result in federal charges. Derek could be looking at several years in prison if convicted. Thomas connected me with Janet Morrison, an attorney who specialized in elder abuse cases and had built her reputation defending seniors against family predators. Janet's initial consultation left me both terrified and empowered. The evidence I had gathered was more than sufficient to pursue criminal charges, and my meticulous documentation had created an airtight case against Derek and Amanda. "Your son has committed multiple felonies," Janet explained during our meeting in her downtown office. "Identity theft, wire fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The systematic nature of this abuse shows premeditation and planning. Most importantly, you have video and audio evidence that proves your mental competency, which destroys any defense they might attempt to mount." While Thomas and Janet prepared the legal groundwork for Derek's prosecution, I made another call that would change the trajectory of my future. Patricia Chen, a real estate agent recommended by Thomas, specialized in helping seniors relocate to retirement communities. When I described my desire to leave Portland entirely and start fresh somewhere peaceful, she immediately suggested several properties in coastal California. One listing captured my imagination immediately: a modest cottage in Mendocino, California, perched on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The house featured a sunlit room that would make a perfect art studio with panoramic windows facing west toward infinite horizons. The price was within reach of my retirement savings, and Patricia assured me that the paperwork could be completed within 2 weeks if I was serious about purchasing. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of genuine excitement about my future. Armed with legal counsel and a clear understanding of my rights, I returned home to begin the most challenging performance of my life. Derek and Amanda had no idea that their entire conspiracy had been exposed, and I intended to keep it that way until the moment I was ready to spring my own trap. I continued my daily routine exactly as before, rising early to prepare breakfast and leaving for my library shifts with the same punctual reliability I had maintained for over 2 decades. To Derek and Amanda, I appeared to be the same compliant woman they had been systematically manipulating and planning to discard. However, my evenings now carried a different purpose. After Derek and Amanda retired to their room, I would retreat to the basement where I had set up a makeshift office among my stored paintings. Using my laptop and the evidence I had gathered, I worked with Janet to document every aspect of their fraud scheme. We organized financial records, transcribed audio recordings, and prepared a comprehensive timeline of their criminal activities. Thomas visited regularly under the guise of checking on my well-being after Robert's death, a concern that Derek and Amanda found touching and appropriate. What they did not realize was that Thomas was actually helping me transfer my financial assets to accounts they could not access or monitor. We moved my savings to a new bank across town, changed all my passwords, and canceled every credit card that Derek had been using without authorization. The psychological manipulation continued to escalate as Derek and Amanda sensed what they believed was their approaching victory. Amanda began making increasingly outrageous demands, insisting that I also surrender Robert's study so it could be converted into a second nursery for future children. She claimed that keeping my late husband's books and desk was morbid and that I needed to move on from the past. Derek supported every one of Amanda's demands, often adding his own suggestions for how I could simplify my lifestyle and reduce the burden I was placing on their young family. He began bringing me pills that he claimed were vitamins designed to improve cognitive function in seniors, but which actually contained mild sedatives that left me feeling drowsy and confused for several hours after taking them. I pretended to take these pills, faithfully palming them while Derek watched and then discarding them later. The hidden cameras captured Derek's satisfaction as he reported to Amanda that the medications were working perfectly and that I was becoming more manageable each day. During this period, I made my most important discovery yet. While pretending to clean the guest room, I found Amanda's medical records hidden beneath her jewelry box. The documents revealed that Amanda was not actually pregnant at all. She had been using a sophisticated prosthetic belly purchased online, complete with realistic weight and movement to maintain her deception. The medical records showed that Amanda had undergone a tubal ligation 3 years earlier and was physically incapable of becoming pregnant. Her plan involved maintaining the pregnancy charade until Derek gained control of my house, at which point she would stage a convenient miscarriage that would generate sympathy while eliminating the need to produce an actual baby. Patricia called with news that my offer on the Mendocino cottage had been accepted. The previous owner was eager to close quickly, and all inspections and paperwork could be completed within 10 days. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to imagine a future filled with ocean breezes and morning light streaming through studio windows where I could finally return to my painting. The cottage was fully furnished with simple, comfortable pieces that reflected a lifetime of careful choices rather than desperate attempts to impress others. A previous owner had clearly been an artist, leaving behind an easel and storage cabinets perfect for art supplies. The kitchen was small but efficient, designed for someone who preferred quality ingredients, prepared simply rather than elaborate entertaining. Most importantly, the cottage represented freedom from manipulation, from walking on eggshells in my own home, and from the constant stress of living with people who saw me as an obstacle rather than a human being deserving of respect and love. As my departure date approached, Derek and Amanda's behavior became increasingly brazen. They began referring to various rooms as our living room and our kitchen, claiming spaces that had been mine for over 3 decades. Amanda started ordering expensive furniture online, charging thousands of dollars to my credit cards for pieces she planned to use in our newly renovated home. Derek contacted several nursing home facilities requesting brochures for their most economical care options. He told the administrators that his mother was experiencing rapid cognitive decline and would need placement within the next few months. The facility representatives sent information packets addressed to me, but Derek intercepted the mail and hid the materials in his room. I discovered these brochures during one of my evidence-gathering sessions, finding them stacked next to a notebook where Derek had been calculating the monthly costs of various care facilities. His notes included comments like cheapest option and minimal family visiting required, revealing his true intentions for my future. The psychological pressure continued to mount as Amanda began staging elaborate scenes designed to make me appear confused or incompetent. She would hide my car keys and then express concern when I could not locate them. She would change the settings on my television and then suggest that I was having trouble with technology. She would move items in the kitchen and then act worried when I could not find them in their usual places. All of these manipulative incidents were captured on my security cameras, creating a detailed record of their systematic gaslighting campaign. Janet assured me that this evidence would be crucial in court, as it demonstrated the premeditated nature of their abuse and their clear intent to undermine my mental competency claims. Derek's meetings with Madison continued weekly, always scheduled when Amanda was out shopping or visiting her sister. The security footage revealed increasingly intimate encounters with Derek, making elaborate promises about their future together once he eliminated what he called the Amanda problem and gained full control of my assets. In one particularly damning recording, Derek told Madison that Amanda was just a useful tool for establishing residency and that he planned to dump her at a homeless shelter, once the house legally became his property. He described elaborate plans for converting my home into rental units that would generate income for his new business venture. Madison, for her part, seemed equally calculating in her approach to their relationship. She regularly reminded Derek that her husband Charles had valuable business connections and that their affair needed to remain secret until Derek had secured sufficient assets to make their partnership worthwhile. The web of lies and betrayal was far more extensive than I had initially realized, but now I possessed every piece of evidence needed to bring their entire conspiracy crashing down. The confrontation I had been planning arrived sooner than expected when Derek decided to accelerate his timeline. On a rainy Thursday evening in late November, he announced that we needed to have a serious family discussion about my future living arrangements. Amanda sat beside him on the sofa I had purchased with my first paycheck from the library, her fake pregnancy belly prominently displayed beneath a tight sweater. "Mom, we've been patient with you, but this situation has gone on long enough." Derek began, his voice carrying the condescending tone he had perfected over recent months. "Amanda is pregnant with your grandchild, and we need stability for our growing family. It's time for you to face reality about your limitations." Amanda nodded sympathetically, playing her role with practiced precision. "Gabrielle, we've all noticed that you've been having difficulties lately. Forgetting where you put things, getting confused about simple tasks, struggling with technology. These are normal signs of aging, but they're also signs that you need help managing your daily life." Derek produced a folder of papers that I recognized from my surveillance footage as the power of attorney documents he had been preparing for weeks. "We've consulted with an elder care attorney, and he's prepared these forms that will allow us to help manage your finances and medical decisions. It's really for your own protection. Once we have these signed," Amanda added with false sweetness, "we can start looking at some really lovely assisted living facilities, places where you'll have professional care and won't have to worry about maintaining this big house anymore." Derek leaned forward, his expression suddenly hardening. "And let's be honest, Mom, this house is way too much for you to handle. Amanda and I can take over the mortgage payments and maintenance responsibilities. We're young enough to handle the work, and you'll have the peace of mind knowing your investment is being protected by family." I sat quietly in my favorite armchair, the same chair where Robert and I had shared morning coffee for 25 years, and listened to my son outline his plan to steal everything Robert and I had worked our entire lives to build. When Derek finished his presentation and slid the papers across the coffee table toward me, I made my move. Instead of reaching for the pen Derek offered, I walked to the dining room and returned with a manila envelope that I placed on the coffee table next to his fraudulent documents. "Before I sign anything," I said calmly, "I think you both should review some paperwork of my own." I opened the envelope and began laying out printed copies of bank statements showing Derek's unauthorized transactions. Next came screenshots of his emails with the real estate attorney, then copies of the reverse mortgage application with his forged signature. Finally, I placed printed frames from the security camera footage showing Amanda searching through my personal papers. Derek's face went through a spectrum of emotions: confusion, recognition, fear, and finally desperate anger. "Mom, I can explain all of this. You're taking everything out of context. You're not thinking clearly." "Actually, Derek, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months," I replied, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "I know about your girlfriend, Madison. I know about Amanda's fake pregnancy. I know about your plan to have me declared mentally incompetent and steal my house." Amanda's hand instinctively moved to her prosthetic belly before she caught herself. The gesture was captured perfectly by the hidden camera that was still recording our conversation. "That's ridiculous," she stammered. "You're obviously having some kind of paranoid episode. I reached into the envelope again and pulled out copies of Amanda's medical records showing her two-ball ligation. These are your medical files, Amanda. Or should I call you Christine, which is apparently your real name according to the background check my attorney ran. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek stared at the medical records, clearly seeing them for the first time, and realizing that his wife had been lying to him as extensively as they had both been lying to me. Derek, did you know that your wife has been married 3 times before and is currently facing fraud charges in 2 other states? I continued my library training, serving me well as I organized the evidence methodically. Or that she's been planning to miscarry your imaginary baby once you gain control of my house? Derek's face crumpled as the full scope of Amanda's deception became clear to him, but his self-preservation instincts quickly took over. Even if that's true, it doesn't change anything about your condition, Mom. You're still showing signs of dementia and you still need help managing your affairs. I smiled for the first time in months, a genuine expression of satisfaction that felt foreign after so many weeks of pretending to be weak and confused. Actually, Derek, I've been evaluated by 3 different doctors over the past 2 weeks. All of them have certified that I'm in perfect mental health. Here are their reports. The medical evaluations arranged by Janet had been thorough and comprehensive. Each physician had conducted extensive cognitive testing and declared me mentally competent to manage my own affairs. The reports specifically noted that I showed no signs of dementia, memory loss, or any condition that would impair my decision-making abilities. Derek's desperation became palpable as he realized his entire plan was collapsing. Fine, you win this round, but you can't throw us out. We're family. We have tenant rights. I nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right about tenant rights, Derek. That's why I've prepared proper eviction notices filed through my attorney and served in accordance with Oregon state law. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. The legal documents prepared by Janet were ironclad. Derek and Amanda had established residency, which meant they could not simply be ejected immediately. However, the evidence of fraud and elder abuse provided legal grounds for eviction, and the 30-day notice had been properly served and documented. Amanda finally found her voice, though it had risen to a near shriek. You can't do this to us. I'm pregnant. You're throwing your own grandchild onto the street. You mean your fake grandchild? I replied calmly. The one you created with a prosthetic belly ordered from a Hollywood special effects company. I have the purchase receipt, Amanda, along with your real medical records showing that pregnancy is physically impossible for you. Derek stood up abruptly, his face flushed with rage and humiliation. You think you're so smart, but you have no idea what you've done. Without us, you'll be all alone in this big house. You'll end up dying alone, and no one will find your body for weeks. His words revealed the cruel calculation that had always lurked beneath his surface concern for my welfare. Derek had never seen me as his mother deserving love and respect. I had simply been an asset to be managed and eventually discarded when I was no longer useful. Actually, Derek, I won't be alone in this house at all, I said, savoring the moment I had been planning for weeks. I sold it yesterday. The closing is scheduled for next Friday, and the new owners take possession the following Monday. The shock on their faces was everything I had hoped it would be. Derek's mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a fish gasping for air. Amanda sank into the sofa, her fake belly shifting noticeably as she lost control of her careful posture. The sale proceeds will allow me to purchase a lovely cottage in California where I'll be starting my new life, I continued. A life free from manipulation, lies, and people who see me as nothing more than an obstacle to their greed. Derek found his voice again, though it came out as a strangled croak. Where are we supposed to go? What are we supposed to do? I stood up from my chair, smoothing my skirt with hands that were finally steady after months of trembling with suppressed anxiety. I suggest you figure that out quickly. The utilities will be disconnected in my name the day after closing, and I've arranged for movers to pack only my personal belongings. Everything else stays with the house. As I walked toward my bedroom, I heard Amanda burst into tears behind me. But these were not the tears of genuine remorse or recognition of wrongdoing. They were the frustrated sobs of someone whose elaborate con game had been exposed and dismantled by the very person they had underestimated. Derek called after me, his voice now pleading rather than demanding. "Mom, wait. We can work this out. Maybe we all made some mistakes, but we're still family." I paused at the threshold of my bedroom and turned back to face the man I had raised, the child I had sacrificed for the son who had repaid my love with calculated cruelty. Derek family members don't forge each other's signatures to steal their homes. Family members don't drug each other to make them appear mentally incompetent. Family members don't plan to abandon each other in substandard nursing homes. You stopped being my family the moment you decided I was worth more to you as a victim than as your mother. With that, I closed my bedroom door and began the final phase of my packing. Tomorrow I would be free. The next morning brought a series of frantic phone calls that I could hear through my bedroom walls as Derek and Amanda tried desperately to salvage their collapsing scheme. Derek's voice carried the panicked edge of someone who had suddenly realized that all his careful planning had been built on a foundation of sand. His first call was to Madison, and I could hear his increasing desperation as the conversation progressed. "Madison, I need to see you immediately. Everything has fallen apart here, and I need your help." "What do you mean you can't talk, Madison? Don't hang up on me." The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know about Madison's loyalty when Derek's prospects had suddenly dimmed. Within an hour, Derek was calling back repeatedly, each attempt going straight to voicemail, as Madison apparently blocked his number and retreated to the safety of her marriage with Charles. Amanda spent her morning on the phone with her sister in Phoenix, begging for a place to stay while they figured things out. The conversation grew increasingly heated as Amanda's sister apparently questioned why Amanda needed emergency housing when she had supposedly been living comfortably with her boyfriend's family. "Lisa, I can't explain everything right now, but the old witch went crazy and threw us out." "What do you mean, what did we do? We didn't do anything. She's obviously having some kind of mental breakdown. No, I can't stay in a hotel because we don't have money for that right now." The call ended abruptly when Amanda's sister apparently hung up, leaving Amanda screaming curses at her disconnected phone. I later learned that Lisa had contacted Derek's aunt and discovered the truth about their fraud scheme, leading her to refuse any assistance to her criminal sister. Derek's attempts to contact his former boss, Charles, went even more poorly. Charles apparently answered his phone with immediate hostility, suggesting that Derek's relationship with Madison had not remained as secret as they had believed. "Charles, I know this is awkward, but I need to speak with you about some business opportunities." "What? No, I don't know what you're talking about." "Charles, calm down. There's obviously been some misunderstanding." The conversation grew increasingly heated until I heard Derek shouting, "You can't prove anything," followed by the distinctive sound of a phone being thrown against the wall. Derek had apparently discovered that his affair with Madison was now public knowledge, and that Charles was threatening both legal action and physical violence if Derek ever contacted his family again. By noon, Derek had resorted to calling random numbers from his phone's contact list, trying to find anyone who might offer temporary shelter or financial assistance. Former colleagues, college friends, and distant relatives all seemed to have similar reactions to his requests for help. Word of his criminal behavior had apparently spread through his social network with remarkable speed. Amanda fared no better in her attempts to secure backup plans. Her parents, who lived in Florida, refused to accept her collect calls after learning about the fraud charges. Her few remaining friends had apparently grown tired of her elaborate lies and dramatic crises over the years and were unwilling to become involved in her latest disaster. The first official consequences arrived that afternoon when Detective Sarah Williams from the Portland Police Department's Elder Abuse Unit knocked on my front door. Janet had filed our criminal complaint that morning, and the detective was there to begin the formal investigation process. Detective Williams was a woman in her 40s, with the kind of direct, no-nonsense demeanor that comes from years of dealing with family predators. She spent 2 hours reviewing the evidence I had compiled, taking detailed notes and photographing documents while Derek and Amanda huddled nervously in the guest room. "Mrs. Brennan, this is one of the most thoroughly documented elder abuse cases I've ever encountered," Detective Williams told me as she prepared to leave. "Your evidence is extensive and clear. We'll be moving forward with formal charges within the week." "What kind of charges are we talking about?" I asked, though Janet had already explained the likely outcomes. "Elder financial abuse, identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy, and possibly RICO charges if we can prove this was part of a larger pattern," the detective replied. "Your son is looking at serious federal time, potentially 8 to 12 years, if convicted on all counts." That evening, Derek made one final attempt to manipulate me into dropping the charges. He knocked softly on my bedroom door, his voice subdued and humble in a way I had not heard since he was a child caught in wrongdoing. "Mom, can we please talk? I know I made some terrible mistakes, but I never meant for things to go this far. I was desperate and scared, and I let Amanda convince me to do things I never should have considered." I opened the door to find Derek looking genuinely distressed, his hair disheveled and his eyes red with what appeared to be tears. For a moment, I felt the familiar maternal instinct to comfort my child that had driven so many of my decisions over the years. "Derek, if you had come to me months ago and told me you were in financial trouble, I would have helped you," I said quietly. "If you had asked for a loan, or help finding work, or even a place to stay while you got back on your feet, I would have said yes immediately. But you chose to lie, steal, and plan my destruction instead." "I know, Mom, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life," Derek replied, and for a moment he sounded like the little boy who had once apologized for breaking my favorite vase. "But if you press charges, I'll go to prison. My life will be over. Isn't there some way we can work this out privately?" The genuine pain in his voice almost broke my resolve until I remembered the security camera footage of him laughing about my future in a cheap nursing home and describing me as a pathetic old woman who never saw it coming. "Derek, you forged my signature on documents that could have left me homeless and destitute," I replied firmly. "You systematically stole money from my accounts. You plan to have me declared mentally incompetent and locked away in substandard care. These aren't mistakes made in desperation. These are calculated crimes committed over many months." "But I'm your son," Derek said, his voice breaking. "Doesn't that mean anything to you? You stopped being my son when you decided to treat me like a victim instead of your mother." I answered, echoing the words I had spoken the night before. Real sons don't destroy their mothers for financial gain. Derek's expression hardened as he realized that his final manipulation attempt had failed. "Fine, but don't expect me to forgive you for ruining my life. And don't expect me to visit you in whatever pathetic little retirement home you end up in." "Derek, I'm not going to a retirement home," I said with a smile that felt more genuine than any expression I had worn in months. "I'm moving to a beautiful cottage by the ocean in California. I'm going to paint again, make new friends, and live the life I choose rather than the life you planned for me." The shock on his face was almost comical. After months of assuming I was weak, dependent, and incapable of independent action, Derek could not process the reality that I had not only escaped his trap, but had actively planned my own liberation. "You bought a house with what money?" he demanded, apparently still believing he had control over my finances. "With my money, Derek. The money you didn't manage to steal, hidden in accounts you didn't know existed, invested wisely over decades of careful financial planning that you were too arrogant to recognize." That night, I heard Derek and Amanda arguing until nearly 3 in the morning, their voices growing increasingly desperate as they realized the full scope of their situation. They had nowhere to go, no money to get there, and no friends or family willing to help them escape the consequences of their choices. The next morning brought news that made their situation even more dire. Detective Williams called to inform me that Derek's case had been referred to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit because similar schemes had been reported in Oregon, Washington, and California. Derek was apparently part of a larger network of family predators who targeted elderly relatives for systematic abuse and theft. Uncle Harold, Derek's father's brother, had contacted the police after hearing about our case through the family network. Harold revealed that Derek had stolen $12,000 from him using identical tactics, moving in under false pretenses, claiming Harold was experiencing cognitive decline and forging documents to access his bank accounts. The FBI investigation expanded to include several other elderly victims across 3 states, with Derek identified as a central figure in what appeared to be an organized criminal enterprise. Amanda, whose real name was indeed Christine Walsh, was wanted on similar charges in Nevada and Arizona for running romance scams against widowed men in their 70s and 80s. Madison's involvement also came to light when Charles contacted the authorities to report his wife's affair and her participation in Derek's business loan scheme. Madison had apparently used her position as Charles's wife to gather inside information about elderly investors in their social circle, information that Derek had used to identify potential victims for future schemes. The revelation that my son had been systematically targeting and destroying vulnerable elderly people filled me with a mixture of rage and profound sadness. This was not a desperate man making poor choices in a moment of crisis. This was a predator who had chosen to build his lifestyle on the suffering of the most vulnerable members of society. As my departure date for California approached, I felt lighter with each passing day, as if I was shedding layers of guilt, obligation, and false responsibility that had weighed me down for years. 6 months after I settled into my oceanfront cottage in Mendocino, Derek's trial began in federal court in Portland. I had spent those months rediscovering myself through daily painting sessions, morning walks along the bluffs, and evenings reading by the fireplace while listening to waves crash against the rocks below. The transformation in my physical and mental health was remarkable. My new doctor marveled at my blood pressure readings and energy levels, attributing the improvement to reduced stress and regular exercise. Thomas had visited monthly, and our friendship had evolved into something deeper and more meaningful than either of us had expected. At 72, he brought a lifetime of wisdom and kindness that Derek had never possessed even as a child. Our relationship was built on mutual respect, shared interests, and genuine affection, rather than obligation and manipulation. The cottage had become everything I had dreamed it would be. My art studio faced west toward infinite ocean horizons, and I had completed more paintings in 6 months than I had managed in the previous 10 years. The local art community welcomed me warmly, and my first gallery showing was scheduled for the upcoming spring season. My neighbors Susan and Betty were retired teachers who had become close friends and frequent dinner companions. Susan brought her expertise in watercolor techniques, while Betty contributed her knowledge of local art history and gallery connections. For the first time in decades, I was surrounded by people who valued my thoughts, respected my opinions, and enjoyed my company without any ulterior motives. When Janet called to request my testimony for Derek's trial, I agreed without hesitation. The prosecution had built their case around the extensive evidence I had gathered, but my personal testimony would be crucial for establishing the emotional impact of Derek's crimes and demonstrating my mental competency to the jury. The courthouse in Portland felt surreal as I returned to the city where I had spent most of my adult life. Everything looked smaller and grayer than I remembered, as if California sunshine had permanently altered my perception of the Pacific Northwest's perpetual gloom. Derek appeared in court wearing an orange jumpsuit that made his complexion look sallow and unhealthy. He had lost significant weight during his months in federal custody, and his hair had begun to show gray at the temples. When he saw me enter the courtroom, his expression went through a rapid series of emotions: hope, anger, resentment, and finally resignation. Amanda, whose real name had been confirmed as Christine Walsh, had already pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony against Derek revealed the full scope of their operation and implicated several other collaborators across multiple states. She received 4 years in federal prison and would face additional charges in Nevada and Arizona upon her release. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented our evidence chronologically, building a timeline of systematic abuse that had begun within weeks of Derek's arrival at my house. Bank records, email transcripts, security camera footage, and medical records created an irrefutable picture of calculated elder abuse designed to steal my home and destroy my independence. Derek's defense attorney, a young public defender named Michael Stevens, attempted to portray his client as a victim of Amanda's manipulation. He argued that Derek was a desperate man who had fallen under the influence of a master manipulator and had gradually been drawn into criminal behavior against his better judgment. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Stevens argued during his opening statement, Derek Brennan is not the mastermind of this operation. He is a man who lost his job, faced financial ruin, and fell prey to a woman with a history of manipulating vulnerable people. When Christine Walsh entered his life, she systematically destroyed his moral compass and convinced him to participate in activities that went against his fundamental nature. However, the prosecution's evidence made this defense strategy impossible to maintain. The FBI had uncovered Derek's involvement in similar schemes dating back over 3 years long, before he had even met Amanda. Uncle Harold's testimony revealed that Derek had attempted to defraud him 18 months before Amanda appeared in Derek's life, using identical tactics and even similar forged documents. Detective Williams testified about additional victims who had come forward after Derek's arrest. An elderly widow in Seattle had lost her pension savings to Derek's cryptocurrency scam. A retired veteran in Sacramento had nearly lost his house to a reverse mortgage scheme identical to the one Derek had attempted against me. In each case, Derek had gained the victim's trust by posing as a helpful family member or caregiver before systematically stealing their assets. When my time came to testify, I felt surprisingly calm despite the gravity of the situation. Janet had prepared me thoroughly for the defense attorney's likely tactics, including attempts to portray me as a vindictive mother seeking revenge against her son, rather than a crime victim seeking justice. Mrs. Patterson. Stevens began during cross-examination. Isn't it true that you've always had a difficult relationship with your son, that you resented his success and independence? Mr. Stevens, Derek lived in my house rent-free for 18 months, while I worked extra shifts to pay his expenses, I replied calmly. If I resented his success, why would I have supported him financially during his unemployment? But you admit that you were angry about his relationship with Amanda? I was concerned about Amanda's behavior, particularly her disrespect for my home and belongings. But I welcomed her into my family and tried to make her feel comfortable despite her constant criticisms. Stevens attempted several more lines of questioning designed to make me appear petty or vengeful, but my answers remained consistent with the documentary evidence. The security camera footage had captured my genuine attempts to accommodate Derek and Amanda's demands, even when those demands were unreasonable and hurtful. The prosecution's rebuttal focused on the systematic nature of Derek's crimes and the devastating impact they would have had on my life if his plans had succeeded. The reverse mortgage alone would have left me homeless and destitute, while the power of attorney documents would have given Derek complete control over my medical care and living arrangements. During Derek's sentencing hearing, several of his other victims testified about the long-term impact of his crimes. Uncle Harold described the depression and paranoia he had experienced after discovering Derek's theft, explaining that the betrayal by a trusted family member had been more devastating than the financial loss itself. The widow from Seattle, whose name was Margaret Sullivan, testified through tears about losing her home and having to move in with her daughter's family after Derek's cryptocurrency scam had depleted her retirement savings. "I trusted him because he was someone's son," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought family members could be trusted to help rather than harm." The judge, the Honorable Patricia Wong, had clearly been moved by the victim testimony. During her sentencing remarks, she addressed Derek directly about the particular cruelty of targeting elderly victims. "Mr. Brennan, elder abuse represents one of the most cowardly forms of criminal behavior," Judge Wong stated. "You systematically targeted people who were vulnerable due to age isolation and declining health. You exploited their trust and their love for family. The psychological damage you inflicted on these victims may never fully heal, and the financial damage you caused has destroyed retirement security that took decades to build." Derek received 8 years in federal prison on charges of elder financial abuse, identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy. His parole conditions would prohibit him from contacting any family members over the age of 60 and would require him to register as a financial predator in any state where he chose to reside after release. The courtroom was nearly empty when Derek's sentence was announced, as most of his former friends and extended family members had abandoned him after learning about his crimes. I was one of only 3 people in the gallery, along with Thomas and Detective Williams. As Derek was led away in handcuffs, he turned to look at me one final time. I searched his face for any sign of remorse or recognition of the pain he had caused, but found only resentment and self-pity. In that moment, I realized that Derek had never truly understood that his actions were wrong. He was angry about being caught and punished, not sorry for the harm he had inflicted. Amanda's sentencing took place the following week. She received 4 years in federal prison, but would face additional charges in other states upon her release. Unlike Derek, she did express apparent remorse during her sentencing hearing, though her tears seemed calculated rather than genuine. "Your Honor, I know I made terrible mistakes," Amanda testified. "I was desperate and scared, and I let that desperation drive me to hurt innocent people. I want Mrs. Patterson to know that I'm sorry for the pain I caused her." However, the prosecution revealed that Amanda had been writing letters from jail to other elderly abuse victims, attempting to convince them to recant their testimony against her in exchange for restitution payments that would never materialize. This continued pattern of manipulation convinced Judge Wong to impose the maximum sentence allowed under Amanda's plea agreement. The broader FBI investigation resulted in arrests across 3 states and exposed a network of family predators who had been sharing information and tactics for targeting elderly victims. Derek's cooperation with the investigation earned him no reduction in his sentence as investigators determined that he had been one of the primary organizers rather than a minor participant. Uncle Harold and I established a relationship that filled some of the family void left by Derek's betrayal. Harold visited me in California twice during my first year there, and we shared stories about Robert and their childhood together. His presence helped me remember that Derek's cruelty was not representative of our entire family. The cottage in Mendocino had exceeded every expectation I had held for my new life. The rhythms of ocean tides provided a peaceful structure to my days, and the changing light on the water offered endless inspiration for my paintings. I had joined a local art collective and was preparing for my first solo exhibition in the town's main gallery. Thomas had proposed during one of his monthly visits, presenting me with a simple ring that had belonged to his late wife. Our engagement represented a partnership between equals rather than a relationship based on need or obligation. We planned a small wedding ceremony on the beach behind my cottage with Uncle Harold officiating and my new artist friends providing the music. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. 2 years after leaving Portland, I stood in the Mendocino Art Gallery surrounded by 30 of my ocean-inspired paintings, watching visitors examine my work with genuine interest and appreciation. The opening reception for my first solo exhibition had drawn a larger crowd than anyone had expected, including several collectors from San Francisco who had driven up the coast specifically to see my landscapes. My painting style had evolved dramatically since moving to California. The constant presence of ocean light had influenced my color palette, leading me toward brighter blues and more complex silver tones that captured the changing moods of the Pacific. My technique had grown more confident and expressive, perhaps reflecting the emotional freedom I had found in my new life. Thomas stood beside me wearing the proud smile of someone who had watched my transformation from frightened victim to confident artist. Our wedding 3 months earlier had been everything I had hoped for: a simple ceremony on the beach, with 20 close friends, followed by dinner at the local inn where we had first talked about our shared love of art and literature. Our marriage was built on the foundation of friendship and mutual respect that had developed over our many conversations during his monthly visits. At 75 and 72 respectively, we had no illusions about romance conquering all obstacles, but we had found something perhaps more valuable: a partnership that enhanced both our lives without diminishing either of our individual identities. The cottage had become our shared sanctuary, with Thomas contributing his extensive library to complement my art studio. His background as a judge brought intellectual stimulation to our conversations, while my artistic perspective helped him see familiar landscapes through new eyes. We had discovered a rhythm of companionship that included both shared activities and independent pursuits. Uncle Harold attended the gallery opening, beaming with pride as he introduced me to his friends as my brilliant niece-in-law, who escaped from Oregon to become a real artist. His presence provided a bridge to my past that honored my memories of Robert while acknowledging the reality of my present happiness. Several of Derek's other victims had stayed in contact with me through a support group for elder abuse survivors that Janet had helped establish. Margaret Sullivan, the Seattle widow who had lost her savings to Derek's cryptocurrency scheme, had recovered most of her money through the federal restitution program and had moved to a beautiful senior community near her daughter's family. Gabrielle, seeing your strength gave me hope when I thought my life was over, Margaret told me during one of our monthly phone conversations. You showed me that surviving someone's cruelty doesn't mean we have to live diminished lives forever. The support group had grown to include over 40 members across the Pacific Northwest, many of whom had been victimized by Derek's network of family predators. Our shared experiences had created bonds of understanding that helped all of us process the unique trauma of being betrayed by people we had trusted and loved. Derek remained in federal prison with 5 years left on his sentence. He had sent several letters attempting to reconcile, but I had followed Janet's advice and returned them unopened to the prison mail system. Detective Williams had warned me that continuing contact with Derek could expose me to further manipulation attempts, and I had learned to prioritize my own emotional safety over misplaced maternal obligations. The letters apparently contained elaborate apologies and promises to make things right upon his release. But his fellow inmates had reported that Derek spent most of his time complaining about the unfairness of his sentence and planning ways to get back at the people who had ruined his life by reporting his crimes. Amanda had been released after serving her 4-year sentence, but was immediately arrested on charges in Arizona related to another romance scam targeting elderly men. Her pattern of victimizing vulnerable people had continued even from prison, where she had been caught running phone scams against lonely seniors using contraband cell phones. The financial restitution process had recovered most of the money Derek had stolen from me and his other victims, though the emotional recovery had taken much longer. The federal prosecutor's office had been remarkably efficient in tracing Derek's assets and forcing him to surrender property and accounts that had been purchased with stolen funds. More importantly, the publicity surrounding Derek's case had led to stronger elder abuse prevention programs and better training for bank employees to recognize signs of financial exploitation. Detective Williams had used our case as a model for training law enforcement officers across the country to investigate family-based elder abuse. My new life in California had brought friendships that enriched every aspect of my daily routine. Susan and Betty had become like sisters, sharing everything from morning coffee to evening wine tastings. Our art collective met weekly to critique each other's work and plan community exhibitions, providing the kind of intellectual stimulation I had missed during my years of social isolation in Derek's shadow. The cottage itself had become a gathering place for artists and writers who appreciated its combination of natural beauty and creative energy. Thomas and I hosted monthly dinner parties where local poets would read their work while guests admired paintings displayed throughout the house. My physical health had improved dramatically since leaving the stress of life with Derek and Amanda. My blood pressure had normalized, my chronic headaches had disappeared, and I had lost the 20 pounds I had gained during the months of emotional eating while dealing with their manipulation. Regular walks on the beach and yoga classes at the community center had restored my energy and confidence. The financial security I had achieved through careful planning and Derek's restitution payments meant that Thomas and I could travel during the winter months, when coastal weather made outdoor painting challenging. We had taken a wonderful trip to art museums in Europe, where I studied the techniques of masters I had only seen in books during my library years. Perhaps most importantly, I had learned to trust my own judgment again after months of gaslighting that had made me question my perceptions and memories. The experience of successfully planning and executing my escape from Derek's trap had restored my confidence in my ability to make complex decisions and protect my own interests. During quiet moments in my studio watching fog roll across the ocean, while I worked on a new painting, I sometimes reflected on the profound changes that had transformed my life. Derek's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also forced me to recognize patterns of enabling and self-sacrifice that had limited my potential for decades. I had spent 30 years prioritizing Derek's needs over my own growth, making excuses for his selfishness and accepting responsibility for his failures. His criminal behavior had been the extreme culmination of a relationship dynamic that had never been healthy or sustainable. The cottage walls were now covered with paintings that reflected my new perspective on life. bold seascapes full of movement and light, quiet coves that suggested peace and safety, dramatic storm scenes that captured nature's power without fear. Each piece represented a step in my journey from victim to survivor to artist. My relationship with Thomas had shown me what healthy love looked like: supportive, without being possessive, caring, without being controlling, intimate, without being invasive. At our age, we both understood that time was precious and that authentic connection required honesty, respect, and genuine interest in each other's well-being. The legal victory over Derek had been important for establishing justice and protecting other potential victims, but the personal victory had been even more significant. I had proven to myself that I was capable of strategic thinking, determined action, and successful independent living, even in my 70s. As I stood in the gallery watching people respond to my art with appreciation and enthusiasm, I realized that Derek's greatest failure had been his inability to recognize my value as a person rather than an asset. His loss was not just the money he would never see or the freedom he had forfeited, but the relationship he could have had with a mother who would have supported his legitimate dreams and celebrated his genuine achievements. The evening's final surprise came when a young couple approached me near the end of the reception. They introduced themselves as Derek's college friends, who had driven up from San Francisco after reading about the exhibition in an art magazine. "Mrs. Patterson, we wanted to tell you how sorry we are about what Derek did," the woman said. "We lost touch with him years ago because his behavior became so selfish and manipulative. We're amazed and inspired by how you've rebuilt your life. Derek used to brag about his plan to inherit your house early," her husband added. "We thought he was just talking, but apparently he meant every word. We're so glad you escaped from his trap." Their words confirmed what I had suspected: Derek's criminal behavior had not been an aberration caused by desperation, but a natural progression of character flaws that had been apparent to observant people for many years. I had been too close to the situation and too invested in maintaining the illusion of family harmony to recognize the warning signs that had been obvious to others. As the gallery began to empty and Thomas helped me gather my things, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The betrayal, pain, and fear had been real and devastating, but they had also forced me to discover strength, creativity, and resilience I had never known I possessed. Standing on the gallery steps with Thomas beside me, looking out over the Pacific Ocean that had become my daily inspiration, I understood that Derek's attempt to destroy my life had instead freed me to live more authentically than I ever had before. The future stretched ahead with infinite possibilities: new paintings to create, places to explore with Thomas, friendships to deepen, and perhaps, most importantly, the continuing daily choice to honor my own needs and dreams rather than sacrificing them for people who would never appreciate or reciprocate such devotion. Derek was learning harsh lessons about consequences in federal prison, while I was learning joyful lessons about freedom in my oceanside cottage. The contrast seemed like perfect justice. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting yourself from toxic behavior? The hardest lesson I learned was that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive choices, even when the person making those choices is your own child. Real love requires boundaries, and protecting yourself from abuse isn't selfish, it's necessary for survival. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about how you've handled difficult family situations. Thank you so much for listening to my story and sharing this journey with me. I hope it reminds you that it's never too late to choose dignity over obligation, respect over manipulation, and authentic happiness over false peace. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe, for more stories of triumph over adversity and share it with anyone who might need to hear that they have the strength to protect themselves and build the life they deserve. Until next time, remember that your worth isn't determined by how much others are willing to sacrifice you for their own gain.